For 30 years, the world believed in a simple deal regarding China. We would buy their cheap t-shirts and toys, and they would buy our debt and our machinery. It was called the Great Moderation, and it kept prices low and profits high. But that deal is dead. Something broke inside the Chinese economy, and to fix it, they are unleashing a new economic weapon that is far more dangerous than a missile or a tank. It is not a blockade, it is a discount. China is flooding the world with advanced technology at prices that defy the laws of capitalism. And while this sounds like a gift to your wallet, it is actually a death sentence for the industries that keep your country running. Inside the global economy breaks down the hidden forces shaping the world economy. To understand why a cheap electric car might destroy the global order, you have to look at what is happening inside China right now. For 2 decades, China grew by building apartments. Real estate was the engine. It accounted for 30% of their entire GDP. It was the primary way Chinese families saved money, but that bubble has burst. The developers are bankrupt, the apartments are unfinished, and the savings of millions of people have evaporated. This created a massive problem for the Chinese government. When people feel poor, they stop spending money. Domestic consumption in China has collapsed. The average Chinese citizen is not buying new cars or new appliances because they are worried about their future. In a normal economy, when demand collapses, the factories slow down. But China is not a normal economy. It is a state-run system that prioritizes social stability above profit. If they close the factories, millions of workers lose their jobs, and unemployed workers are a threat to the political power of the state. So the government made a choice. They decided to keep the factories running. In fact, they decided to double down. If Chinese people cannot buy these goods, they will simply export them to the rest of the world. But they cannot just sell them at normal prices, because the world is already full of stuff. So they have to sell them at a loss. They are subsidizing their manufacturing sector with billions of dollars of state loans, allowing companies to sell products for less than the cost of the raw materials used to make them. This is what economists call exporting deflation. And this time, it is different from the shock we saw in the early 2000 years. Back then, China wiped out the textile and furniture industries in the West. It was painful, but Western economists argued that it was okay because we would keep the high-value industries. We would let China make the socks, and we would make the cars and the computer chips and the airplanes. But China 2.0 is not about socks. Today they are overproducing the exact industries that the West needs to survive. Solar panels, lithium batteries, electric vehicles, steel, shipbuilding. These are the strategic pillars of the 21st century economy, and China is producing them at a scale that the world cannot absorb. Let us look at the solar industry. China now produces enough solar panels to cover the demand of the entire world twice over. The supply is so massive that the price of panels has crashed by 50% in a single year. European solar manufacturers are going bankrupt one after another. They cannot compete. It is mathematically impossible to compete with a company that does not need to make a profit to survive. Now look at the auto industry. This is the frightening one for Germany and Japan and the United States. The auto industry is the backbone of the industrial West. It employs millions of people. It supports steel and glass and rubber and electronics. For 100 years, Western car companies competed on quality and brand. But now they are facing a competitor like BYD that can sell a high-quality electric vehicle for $12,000. If you are a consumer, this looks fantastic. Why would you pay $40,000 for a Ford or a Volkswagen when you can get a better car for $12,000? It seems like the free market at work, but it is not a free market. It is a distorted market. The Chinese company is backed by endless cheap credit from state banks. The Western company has to answer to shareholders and pay market rates for capital. If we allow these goods to flood the market unchecked, the result is predictable. The Western auto industry will collapse. It will be the same thing that happened to the solar industry and the steel industry. Factories will close, supply chains will wither. And once the Western competitors are gone, the prices will not stay low forever. That is the trap. This dynamic creates a terrifying dilemma for Western politicians. On one hand, they want to fight inflation. Their voters are angry about the high cost of living. Allowing cheap Chinese goods into the country would smash inflation instantly. It would make clothes and cars and electronics affordable again. It would look like a victory for the middle-class consumer. But on the other hand, it would deindustrialize their nations. It would leave the United States and Europe completely dependent on China for the most critical technologies of the future. Imagine a world where the West no longer knows how to build its own ships, or its own cars, or its own energy infrastructure. That is not just an economic loss, that is a national security catastrophe. So the West is reacting, and this is where the trade war turns into a systemic breakdown of global commerce. We are seeing a wall of tariffs going up. The United States has already slapped 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. Europe is launching investigations into Chinese subsidies. Brazil and India and Mexico are putting up their own barriers. We are watching the end of the era of free trade. For 30 years, the rule was that efficiency mattered most. If you could make it cheaper, you won. Now the rule is that security matters most. If you make it cheaper, but you are a geopolitical rival, you lose. But here's the twist that no one talks about. Tariffs are inflationary. If you block the cheap Chinese goods, you are forcing your consumers to pay the higher price. You're essentially taxing your own citizens to save your domestic industries. This means that the fight against inflation is going to get much harder. We are entering a period where we have to choose between cheap goods and secure jobs. We cannot have both. This shift turns the entire global economic model upside down. For decades, China was the deflationary force that kept global prices stable. They absorbed the world's inflation. Now that link is being severed. As the world fragments into separate trading blocks, inefficiencies will rise. Costs will rise. The seamless global supply chain is being cut into pieces. The Chinese leadership knows this is happening. President Xi Jinping understands that the West is closing its doors, but he is betting that the rest of the world is still open. This is why China is aggressively courting the global South. They are selling their excess capacity to Africa and South America and Southeast Asia. They are building the infrastructure of the developing world in exchange for resources and political loyalty. This creates a split world. One block is the high-cost protected West trying to rebuild its industrial base. The other block is the China-centric developing world running on cheap Chinese technology. This is not just a trade dispute. It is a competition between two entirely different operating systems for the global economy. And inside China, the pressure is building. The strategy of exporting their way out of a crisis has a limit. You cannot force the world to buy what it does not need. Eventually, the factories will have to slow down. Eventually, the bad loans will have to be recognized. The deflation that China is exporting is a symptom of a deep sickness in their own system. They have built a production machine that is too big for their own people and now too big for the world. When a machine runs too fast for too long, it breaks. We are seeing the smoke rising from the gears. The frantic push to sell cheap goods is not a sign of strength. It is a sign of desperation. China is trying to export its unemployment to us. They are trying to save their social contract by breaking ours. The danger is that this economic friction leads to real friction. Throughout history, trade wars have often preceded real wars. When nations stop trading goods, they often start trading gunfire. The 1930s taught us that protectionism can deepen a depression and radicalize politics. We are walking the same path. The next time you see a headline about a trade war or a new tariff or a cheap electric car, do not just think about the price tag. Think about the hidden mechanism underneath. Think about the empty apartments in China and the closed factories in Ohio or the Ruhr Valley. They are connected. The global economy is a closed loop. You cannot squeeze one part without inflating another. China tried to corner the market on everything. Now they are drowning in their own inventory. And their attempt to swim to the surface is creating waves that will capsize economies thousands of miles away. The era of cheap stuff was built on a bubble. That bubble has popped. Now we have to pay the real price. The deflation export is the final act of the old economic order. It is the last desperate gasp of globalization before the walls go up. Prepare yourself for a world that is more expensive, more divided, and more dangerous. The discount is over. This situation reveals a fundamental flaw in how we thought about the global economy. We thought that interdependence would prevent conflict. We thought that if China and the US relied on each other, they would never fight. But interdependence becomes a weapon when one side relies on the other too much. We relied on China for supply. They relied on us for demand. Now both sides are trying to break that dependency at the same time. The scale of China's overcapacity is hard to visualize. Imagine every car factory in Japan and Germany and the US combined. China has more capacity than that. They have built enough battery factories to supply 4 times the global demand for batteries. These factories are brand new. They are automated. They are efficient. And they are sitting there hungry for orders that are not coming fast enough. To keep these factories running, local governments in China are giving them free land. They are giving them electricity at half the cost. They are telling banks to lend them money even if they never pay it back. This is why a Chinese wind turbine costs half as much as a European one. It is not because the Chinese workers are paid less, although they are. It is because the cost of capital in China is effectively zero for strategic industries. In a capitalist system, a factory that loses money closes down. In the Chinese state capitalist system, a factory that loses money is kept alive because it serves the national interest. This breaks the fundamental logic of Western capitalism. How does a private company like Ford or Siemens compete with a sovereign state that can print money to cover losses? They cannot. This is why the word protectionism is coming back into fashion. For 40 years, protectionism was a dirty word. Economists taught us that tariffs were bad and free trade was good. But that theory assumes everyone plays by the same rules. When one player changes the rules, the other players have to change the game. The tariffs we are seeing now are not just about protecting profits. They are about survival. If the West loses its auto industry, it loses the machine tools, the robotics, and the software ecosystems that go with it. Once that industrial knowledge is gone, it takes generations to get it back. We learned this the hard way with the semiconductor industry. We let it go to Asia and then realized we could not build a missile or a smartphone without Taiwan. We are not going to make that mistake again with cars. But rebuilding industry is painful. It takes time. It costs money. It requires mining lithium and building power plants and training workers. And while we do that, prices will be higher. The cheap microwave and the cheap TV were the dividends of peace. Now we are paying the tax of conflict. We also have to look at the internal pressure in China. Why don't they just boost their own consumption? Why don't they give money to their households so they can buy these cars? The answer lies in their political philosophy. The Chinese leadership dislikes the idea of a welfare state. They view direct handouts to consumers as welfarism that makes people lazy. They prefer to invest in supply, not demand. They prefer to build a bridge or a factory rather than write a check to a family. This ideological stubbornness is the root of the problem. They are trying to solve a demand problem with a supply solution. They are making more shoes when the problem is that people have no feet. Until China changes this internal philosophy, they will continue to dump their excess production on the world, and the world will continue to put up walls. This creates a vicious cycle. As the West blocks Chinese goods, China's growth slows down even more. As China slows down, they become more desperate to export, which leads to more dumping and more tariffs. It is a downward spiral that ends in a fractured global economy. There is also a currency angle to this. To keep their exports cheap, China is letting its currency weaken. A weaker yuan makes Chinese goods cheaper in dollars or euros, but a weak currency makes the Chinese people even poorer because it makes imported food and energy more expensive for them. It transfers wealth from the Chinese household to the foreign consumer. It is a policy that sacrifices the well-being of the Chinese citizen to maintain the power of the Chinese state. This is the tragedy of the situation. The Chinese people are working hard. They are saving. They are building amazing things. But the system is rigged against them. It prevents them from enjoying the fruits of their labor. And now that system is threatening the livelihoods of workers in the rest of the world too. The narrative of China as the economic savior of the world is over. In 2008, China saved the global economy by launching a massive stimulus package. They built roads and airports and cities, and that demand lifted the whole world out of recession. But today, China is the drag on the global economy. They are the source of the deflationary shock. They are no longer the engine, they are the anchor. As we move forward, you need to watch the trade data, watch the balance of payments. These boring spreadsheets tell the story of the conflict. When you see a country's trade surplus explode like China's has, that is a warning sign. It means the system is out of balance. And in economics, just like in nature, imbalances always correct themselves, usually violently. The correction is happening now. It is happening in the form of trade barriers and geopolitical tension. The invisible hand of the market has been replaced by the visible fist of the state. Governments are taking control of the economy again. They are deciding who can buy what and from where. This is a return to a darker timeline, a timeline where economics is a zero-sum game. If I win, you lose. The win-win mentality of globalization is gone. And in a zero-sum world, the most dangerous thing you can be is naive. You have to understand that the price on the shelf is not just a number. It is a signal. A low price from China is a signal of distress in their economy. A high price in the West is a signal of the cost of sovereignty. We are relearning the value of resilience. We are relearning that the cheapest option is often the most expensive one in the long run. The deflation export is just the beginning. It is the first wave of the great unwinding. The global economy is breaking apart into blocks, and the friction between those blocks will generate heat. That heat will manifest as inflation, as political instability, and potentially as conflict. The story of the next 10 years will be the story of how the world adjusts to a China that is too big to ignore but too aggressive to integrate. It is the story of the unstoppable force of Chinese production meeting the immovable object of Western protectionism. And you're standing right in the middle. Inside, the global economy will continue to track these forces. We will continue to look at the data that others ignore. Because the only way to navigate this new world is to see the map clearly. And the map has changed. The old routes are closed, the new paths are dangerous, but at least now you know why. I'm Tom, and this is Inside the Global Economy. Subscribe now, because when this era is studied, only a few will be able to say they saw it coming.